Texas Hill Country. June 1876. Lightning split the dusk sky as the stagecoach wheel cracked in two, sending the whole rig into a wild tilt. Laurel Renshaw threw her arms around her daughter and son, shielding them as the coach skidded sideways into the mud. The driver cursed, horses screamed, and when it all stopped, silence fell hard and sudden. Laurel shoved open the door with her shoulder, stepping out into the thick, humid air of a summer storm. Her dress was torn at the hem, soaked through. The road behind them was a jagged mess of broken wheel tracks and overturned trunks. Her knees trembled, but she kept upright, pulling her children close. "Are you hurt?" she asked, brushing wet hair from her daughter's face. Penny shook her head wide-eyed. "No, Mama." Peter, who had just turned 8, clutched his arm. "I think I twisted something." The driver limped over, face pale. "Nearest town's about 15 miles west. I ain't got no way to get you there tonight. I'll head back east for help." Laurel stared at him. "You're leaving us out here?" He didn't answer. Just hitched his coat tighter and started walking. Thunder cracked again. Laurel looked to the horizon. The sun was gone now, swallowed by black clouds. She had no horse, no shelter, and 2 children to protect. Her husband had left 3 years ago, gone without a word and never come back. She had sold everything to move west, to start over with her children in a small town called Willow Creek, where her cousin had promised work. Now she was alone on a muddy road with nothing but a broken stagecoach and a fading hope. "Mama," Penny whispered, "what do we do?" Before Laurel could answer, the sound of hooves came from the west. She turned, heart racing, as a lone rider emerged from the trees. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his coat dark with rain and a rifle strapped across his back. His hat was pulled low, but as he rode closer, she saw his face sharp-jawed, tanned, and serious, the face of a man who had seen hard years and lived through them. He slowed his horse, eyes scanning the wreck, then the woman standing with 2 soaked children. He dismounted in one smooth motion. "You all right?" he asked, voice deep and steady. Laurel nodded, though her voice cracked. "We're not hurt bad, just stuck." He looked at Peter's arm. "That needs wrapping. You got supplies?" "No," she said. The coach was carrying all we had. He crouched, checked the boy's arm gently, then stood. "I've got a cabin about 5 miles from here. Dry roof, firewood, and food. I can take you there." Laurel hesitated. "I do not know you." He met her eyes. "Name's Calder Lawton. I raise cattle west of here. You can wait for the driver to come back, but with this storm, that might be days. Up to you." Laurel looked down at her children. Peter was shivering. Penny leaned into her side. She gave a short nod. "Thank you," she said. He helped her up behind him, then lifted each child with careful hands. The ride was long and cold, but Calder was solid beneath her, warm through the storm. He did not speak more than needed, just rode steady through wind and rain. At his cabin, he lit a fire fast, set a pot of beans on the stove, and found dry blankets. Laurel helped her children change into shirts far too large for them while Calder wrapped Peter's arm with surprising care. "You have children?" she asked softly. "No," he said. "But I had a younger brother once. Raised him mostly myself." Laurel nodded, watching him prepare a bed of quilts for the children by the fire. She had not felt safe in years, not since before her husband left. Tonight, though, watching Calder move with quiet strength, she felt something she could almost name. The storm raged through the night. Penny and Peter fell asleep curled together. Laurel sat near the hearth, drying her hair with a towel Calder had given her. "You are kind," she said. He glanced at her. "I am just doing what is right," she smiled faintly. "That is rare these days." He looked at her a long moment. "You are not what I expected." "What did you expect?" He shook his head. "A woman traveling west with 2 children alone. I figured you would be broken." "Bitter." Laurel turned her face to the fire. I was, for a long time. He moved closer, sat beside her. What changed? She looked at her children. Them, I had to keep going, no matter how much it hurt. They sat in silence after that, the kind that felt full, not empty. The next morning, the sun came bright on wet leaves. Calder lent her an old dress of his mother's and rode into town. He returned with her trunk strapped to his horse and news that the stage driver had made it back. They will send someone to fetch the coach, he said. But it will not be today. Laurel met his eyes. Then we stay, he gave a nod. You can stay as long as you need. She did not know why, but her heart settled some at those words. She cleaned his kitchen while he worked the barn. The children played with a carved wooden horse Calder had made years ago. By the 5th day, Laurel had braided Penny's hair in the morning light while Calder fixed the porch steps. When she brought him water, he looked at her with something soft in his eyes. I do not want to send you away, he said. She swallowed. I do not want to leave. That night, after the children were asleep, they stood outside under a sky full of stars. The breeze was warm, the land quiet. Calder turned to her and for the first time touched her cheek. You are not perfect, Laurel. You are tired, scared, and stubborn as hell. She laughed, breath catching. He stepped closer. But I do not want a perfect woman, I want you. Her eyes filled. She had not cried in years, but this time it was not grief, it was something gentler. She reached up, cupped his rough jaw. I want you too. He leaned in, kissed her slow and sure, and she kissed him back like she had never known safety until now. Inside, the fire crackled soft and the wind blew gentle through the trees. For the first time in what felt like forever, Laurel believed in home again. By the 2nd week, Laurel had taken to rising before the sun, not out of habit, but because the stillness of early morning gave her a kind of peace she hadn't known in years. The cabin's walls held the scent of old cedar and hearth smoke, and the floorboards creaked softly beneath her bare feet as she poured water from the pitcher into the basin. Outside, the wind carried the call of doves and the slow waking rustle of the grasslands. Calder was already out back, splitting wood. She could hear the steady rhythm of the axe striking the stump as she wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped outside. He paused when he saw her, resting the axe against the chopping block. You sleep? He asked. Some, she said, brushing a wisp of hair from her cheek. Peter's arm ached a little. I gave him a compress. He settled after. Calder nodded, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. I've got a salve in the barn, made it from pine pitch and bear fat. Might help. I'll try it, she said. Thank you. He leaned against the fence rail, watching the sky turn from dusky blue to pale gold. You ever think about staying put somewhere long enough to plant something? She hesitated. I used to, before the debts came, before the leaving. Not everyone's got land to spare, he said. But I do, and it's no good without hands to work it. She glanced at him. Is that what you're offering? His eyes didn't waver. I'm saying I don't see the sense in you moving on if you don't have to. She didn't answer then, just turned and walked back inside to start the fire for breakfast. Later that morning, Calder saddled his horse and asked if she'd ride with him to the high ridge past the creek. You'll want to see what it looks like from up there, he said. If you're thinking of putting down roots. Peter and Penny stayed behind with a neighboring widow who'd raised 5 children of her own and still kept a sharp eye and a quick hand. Laurel trusted her enough to let them go. The ride was long but quiet. Laurel didn't speak, not because she had nothing to say, but because Calder's presence beside her felt like enough. The grass rose high on either side of the trail, wildflowers scattered among it, and 2 hawks circled above in slow arcs. When they reached the ridge, she reined in beside him and caught her breath. Below stretched a wide valley, green and gold, with a silver creek winding through it. A small herd of cattle grazed near a cottonwood grove, and beyond them, The land rose again in gentle hills. "You run all that?" she asked, voice low. He nodded. "My father staked it after the war. I built it back up after he passed." She looked out over it, then at him. "And now, I'm tired of eating alone," he said. "Tired of quiet that don't mean nothing." The wind picked up, tugging at the loose strands of her hair. She pressed her hand to her chest, steadying the ache there. "You don't know what you're asking." "I know exactly what I'm asking." She turned toward him, his face shadowed by the brim of his hat, but his eyes clear and unwavering. "You think I'm strong," she said, "but I'm worn thin. I've made mistakes I can't undo. I get angry too fast. I keep too much to myself." He stepped closer. "I don't want a perfect woman, I want you." She didn't move, didn't blink. His words settled around her like the warmth of a wool blanket after a cold wind. She felt the truth of them in her bones. He reached out slowly, his hands rough from years of work, and held her face with a tenderness that undid her. She closed her eyes, and when he kissed her, it wasn't hurried or uncertain. It was the kind of kiss that came from knowing loss, from choosing to hope anyway. When they rode back down, the sun was high and hot, and her hands no longer trembled on the reins. Something inside her had shifted quietly, like a fence post settling into firm ground. That evening, Laurel helped Penny wash the dishes while Peter sat carving a small piece of wood by the hearth. Calder leaned in the doorway, arms crossed. "You ever broken a horse?" he asked her. She glanced at him, amused. "No," he tilted his head. "You might be good at it." She raised a brow. "Why's that?" "Takes patience. And a kind of stubborn grace. You got both." She shook her head, smiling. "You talk like you've already decided." "I have," he said. "Just waiting on you to catch up." She dried her hands and stepped toward him, the lamplight catching the curve of her cheek. "Then maybe I will." Calder didn't reply, but he nodded once, slowly, like something had just fallen into place. And for the first time in years, Laurel didn't feel like she was standing on the edge of leaving. She felt like she'd arrived. The days settled into rhythm, slow, deliberate, like the way a creek carves its shape into stone. Each morning, Laurel rose to the scent of fresh-cut mesquite smoking on the wind, and the creak of Calder's saddle leather as he rode out to check the herd. She packed biscuits wrapped in cloth and sent Penny and Peter to the neighbors to learn harness mending and egg sorting. In the quiet that followed, she swept the porch, patched worn seams, and stitched new ones with thread pulled from a tin her mother once passed down. One afternoon, she found Calder stripping bark from fence posts behind the barn, his shirt off and back streaked with dust and sweat. She carried 2 enamel cups of cool water, the sun easing toward the west behind her. "You always work this hard?" she asked, handing him a cup. He drank slow, nodding toward the posts. "Frost heaved the north line. Cattle'll wander if it's not mended." She tipped her head. "You trust a woman with a hammer. Reckon I trust you with whatever you put your hands to." He passed her a mallet without another word. She took it, settled beside him, and they worked until the shadows stretched long and the fence stood straight again. Blisters bloomed on her palms, but she didn't mind. That evening they sat on the porch steps while Peter picked out a tune on the mouth harp Calder had given him. Penny braided strips of calico into a long cord. "You ever miss the city?" Calder asked, voice low. Laurel looked toward the horizon. "Sometimes. The quiet here is different. It doesn't press in like it used to." He rubbed his thumb along a groove in the railing. "You ever think about marrying again?" She didn't answer right away. The last time she'd been asked that, it had come from a man who saw her as a burden to be managed, not a partner to be known. "I think about being wanted," she said finally, "but not for what I can do, for who I am." Calder studied her, then looked away. "I used to think I'd marry someone with fine hands who spoke soft and never raised her voice." Laurel laughed once under her breath. "You're a poor judge of character then." I was, he said. Now I know better. The next morning, a letter arrived by Ryder, addressed in her cousin's slanted hand. She opened it on the porch, reading while the chickens pecked near the steps. They found me work in Willow Creek, she said, folding it carefully. Schoolhouse needs a teacher. Calder didn't lift his eyes from the rope he was oiling. That what you want? I don't know, she said quietly. It's what I thought I needed before. He stood slowly, wiped his hands on a rag and met her gaze. You're free to go, always have been, she nodded. And if I stayed, his voice was steady, then I'd build you a door that faces east so you could watch the sun rise every day you wanted to. And a room for your children with shelves for their stories. Laurel stepped down, the letter still clutched in her hand. You do all that, I would, he said. Because I don't want a perfect woman, I want you, her breath caught. Not from surprise, but from the way the words fit into her, like they'd been waiting a long time to be heard. She crossed the space between them, pressed her fingers to his chest. I don't need the town, she said. I need this. Calder leaned in, and this time when he kissed her, it was with the certainty of two people who had come to understand one another without needing to explain. The kind of understanding built not from promises, but from weathered days and quiet trust. The letter fluttered from her hand and landed in the dirt. Neither of them moved to retrieve it. By late July, the air had thickened with heat, the kind that made every chore deliberate and sweat bead at the base of Laurel's spine before the sun even cleared the roofline. Cicadas droned in the mesquite, and the creek out past the cattle gate had slowed to a trickle, its banks cracked and pale. She and Calder had carved out a rhythm that fit better than she could have predicted. He never asked for more than she could give, never spoke over her silence, but somehow still always seemed to know when her hands needed something to do and when they just needed rest. That morning, she stood at the far edge of the field with a basket swinging from her arm, watching Penny gather wild sage into bundles. Peter trailed behind, careful not to jostle his splinted arm too hard as he chased grasshoppers through the brush. Calder had ridden out earlier to meet a neighbor about trading 2 steers for seed oats, and though the quiet was welcome, she found herself waiting for the sound of his return in the distance. "Mama," Penny called, lifting a bundle toward her. "Can we dry these in the loft?" Laurel nodded. "Tie them with twine and hang them near the rafters, not too close to the ladder." Penny ran off barefoot, her braid bouncing behind her. Peter followed, holding up a crooked little creature in his palm. Laurel turned back toward the cabin, her feet sinking slightly into the soft earth. She hadn't meant to start hoping for more, but it had crept in, quiet and persistent like the way Calder always left the coffee pot warm on the stove when he knew she'd be late rising, or how he'd started whittling a small cradle-board frame from juniper without ever asking if she wanted another child one day. When hoofbeats finally rose from the trail, she waited until he crested the ridge before she stepped forward. His hat was tilted back slightly, and the sun caught the line of his jaw like it had been carved by the very light itself. "I brought something," he said, dismounting. She raised a brow. "Aside from your usual charm," he reached into the saddlebag and pulled out a letter, folded neatly and sealed with wax. "One of the ranch hands passed through town. This came for you." She took it, her fingers brushing his. The seal was unfamiliar. She broke it slowly, eyes scanning each line. "Well," Calder asked, "it's from a woman named Miss Trudy Gable. She runs a boarding house in town, says she heard I might be teaching in Willow Creek. Offered me a room and board in trade for cooking suppers each night." Calder didn't speak. He just looked at her, steady as always. "I'm not going," she said. He exhaled, barely audible. "Why?" "Because I'm already where I want to be." She tucked the letter into her apron pocket. Calder stepped forward, close enough that she could smell the dust on his coat, the faint scent of leather and horses. "Laurel," he said. "I've been thinking some." She waited. "I got a spare room that's no good to me, been empty since my brother passed. I thought maybe it could be yours and the children's, if you wanted it." Her voice was quiet. "You asking me to move in?" He nodded. "I am." She reached up, touched the edge of his collar, her fingers brushing the worn fabric. "And if I say yes, what changes?" He met her eyes. "Nothing you don't want to, but if I had my way, I'd wake up beside you, every morning, hear your voice in this house. Watch those children grow up with fences to climb and dirt to run through. I'd build on what we already have." She didn't answer at first. Her hand fell away, but she didn't step back. The wind stirred the dry grass behind them. Somewhere farther off, a hawk called. "You think you can love a woman like me?" she asked. "One who's been through what I have." Calder didn't hesitate. He reached out, cupped her face in both hands, his thumbs brushing the hollows beneath her cheekbones. "I don't want a perfect woman," he said, his voice low, steady, unmistakably certain. "I want you." She leaned into his touch, something inside her loosening like a knot finally released. "Then you have me," she whispered. He kissed her, not with urgency, but with the quiet surety of someone who had already chosen, long before the words were spoken. And when she kissed him back, it wasn't with longing, it was with arrival. That night, she unpacked the last of her things into the room he'd cleared. Penny fell asleep curled beneath a quilt Calder's mother had stitched years before. Peter lay beside her, his carved wooden horse tucked beneath his arm. Laurel stood in the doorway, watching them, her hand resting lightly on the frame. Behind her, Calder said, "You all right?" She turned. "I'm better than all right." He stepped beside her, wrapped an arm around her waist. "This is just the beginning." She leaned into him, and for the first time in all her wandering, she believed it. August brought a dry spell, the kind that turned the creek to a string of standing pools and left the garden soil brittle underfoot. Laurel took to carrying water from the well in the early hours, before the sun pressed its weight across the land. The children were stronger now, Peter's arm nearly healed, Penny growing into her voice with quiet confidence, but they still rose slow in the heat, their laughter softened by the dust. One morning, Calder returned from the far pasture with a limp in his step and a shallow gash across his thigh. Laurel found him at the barn, brushing down his horse with one hand, the other pressed to the dark stain spreading beneath his trouser leg. "You didn't think to call for me?" she asked, setting down the basket she'd been carrying. He kept brushing. "Didn't feel urgent." She crouched beside him, peeled back the torn fabric. "You caught a barbed wire. It was loose. Snagged me coming down the slope." She stood, hands already streaked with blood and dust. "Sit on the porch, don't argue." Calder obeyed, though his jaw was tight. Laurel boiled water, steeped a cloth in yarrow and goldenrod from the bundles Penny had hung in the loft, then cleaned the wound with careful hands. "You ever let anyone tend to you before?" she asked, pressing a fresh cloth into place. "My brother used to try," he said. "Didn't have your touch, though. Just poured whiskey and told me to bite down." Laurel tied off the bandage, her eyes meeting his. "You don't have to be the one who never flinches. Not with me." He reached for her hand, held it steady in his. "I know that now." They sat in the sun's edge as it crept across the porch boards. The chickens murmured in the yard, and a fly buzzed lazy around the water bucket. Laurel didn't move to pull away. Later that week, they hitched the wagon and rode into town for supplies. It was the first time Laurel had returned since the stage had broken down. The general store's bell rang sharp as they entered, and a few heads turned, curious but not unkind. Calder nodded to the proprietor, ordered flour, sugar, and new nails for the fence. Laurel stepped to the back shelf, choosing a length of muslin for Penny's growing legs and a tin button mold Peter had eyed in the catalog. When she turned, Calder was speaking with a woman she didn't know, older, with a mouth drawn tight and a hat pinned with a dusty feather. "She your wife, then?" the woman asked, not bothering to lower her voice. Calder didn't look away from Laurel. "Not yet, but she's mine." The woman sniffed once, turned back to her ledger. Outside, Laurel handed him the parcel of cloth. "You didn't have to say it like that." "I meant it," he said, tying the bundle behind the seat. "I know what you've carried, Laurel, but I'll claim you if you'll let me." She stepped closer, resting her fingers over his. "I'll claim you right back." That night, they sat under the stars behind the cabin, a quilt spread across the grass. Penny had fallen asleep beside Peter in the loft, both of them worn out from the ride and the newness of town. Calder traced a circle in the dirt with the toe of his boot. "You never told me what you dream of, not the practical things, the ones that wake you soft in the morning." Laurel leaned back on her hands, eyes on the scattering of stars. "A piano, maybe, one with a chipped key or two, a small orchard pears if the soil will take them. And Sunday mornings where no one rushes anywhere." He was quiet a long beat. "I think we could build that together." She turned to him, the night air cooling the sweat at her neck. "You're not afraid I'll leave?" "I used to be," he said, "but not anymore. You came back from the edge of everything, and you chose this." She kissed him then, slow and sure, pressing her forehead to his after. "I choose it every day." The wedding was quiet, held beneath the cottonwood near the pasture. Penny scattered dried wildflowers along the path, and Peter wore a new vest Laurel had stitched from leftover wool. The neighbor widow, hands still strong, baked a sweetbread with honey and pecans. Calder wore his father's ring on a leather cord around his neck, until the moment Laurel took it and slid it onto her own finger. They didn't speak vows beyond what their eyes had already said 100 times. When the sun dipped low and the cattle stirred in the distance, Calder laid his hand over Laurel's and whispered only, "Home." Years passed. The orchard took root, and by the third spring, 2 of the trees bore fruit. Laurel taught her children from the porch table writing, ciphering, and the names of every bird that visited the well. Calder built her a bench from juniper, smooth and strong, and when she played the old piano he traded 2 calves and a saddle for. He sat beside her, one hand on her knee, steady as always. They grew older, lined by sun and wind but never apart. And on warm evenings, when the children were grown and the porch creaked beneath their feet, Laurel would rest her head on Calder's shoulder and say, "We did it. We made something good." And Calder, always a man of few words, would kiss the top of her head and say only, "You were the good."